On a foggy Kentucky morning, Confederate Brig. General Felix Kirk Zollicoffer's body lay on the muddy earth, surrounded by curious Union Army soldiers. "What are you doing here?" a federal officer bellowed at the men as the Battle of Mill Springs raged on January 19, 1862. "Why aren't you at the stretchers tending to the wounded?" "This is Zollicoffer," one soldier responded, pointing to the corpse. "I know that," the officer replied. "He's dead and couldn't have been sent to his fate by a better man. For call, speed, Fry shot him. Leave him and get to work." Earlier that cold day, Zollicoffer, a former Tennessee congressman and Nashville newspaper editor, had mistakenly ridden into Union lines. After a brief exchange of fire, he fell from his horse, mortally wounded in the chest. Fry may have been the one to fire the fatal shot that killed the 49-year-old commander, mockingly called Zollicoffer and an old he-devil by the Yankees, though no one can say for certain. Even after his death, Union soldiers and others desecrated Zollicoffer's body, stripping it of outer garments, buttons, hair, and even pieces of his underclothes. Old Zolly, however, was not the only fallen commander treated with disrespect during the Civil War. Since ancient times, scavengers, ghouls, and relic hunters have plundered fallen soldiers. After the famous final clash between Napoleon and Wellington at the Battle of Waterloo in June 1815, locals and soldiers reportedly extracted teeth from the dead using pliers. This gruesome act wasn't driven by vengeance but by practicality. Early dental craftsmen boiled the teeth, trimmed the ends, and mounted them onto ivory dentures. According to the British Dental Association, Waterloo teeth were listed in dental supply catalogs well into the 1860s. At Gettysburg in July 1863, soldiers from both sides collected mementos from the dead. A 14th Connecticut soldier, examining a fallen Confederate from Pickett's charge, noticed the curly-haired young man clutching something near his left breast. Breaking the rebel's death grip, the soldier discovered a daguerreotype of a young woman in her late teens or early 20s. "I treasure it as the most precious relic of my war experience," he later recalled. Civilians also gathered keepsakes from Gettysburg's fallen. Abby Howland Woolsey wrote of her mother, a nurse, who collected battle souvenirs from Confederates. One from a rebel lieutenant who died under her care, and numerous palmetto buttons from South Carolina, rebel coats, filthy but grateful, poor souls, and so forth. In his renowned Civil War memoir, Company H, Confederate soldier Sam Watkins, who seemed to witness every major event in the Western theater, described his attempt to take boots from a fallen Federal colonel. "He wore the finest uniform I ever saw, a red sash and a splendid sword. I particularly noticed his boots. I needed them and planned to wear them in his place, but I couldn't stomach the idea of taking a dead man's shoes. I lifted his foot and made one attempt to remove the boot. Looking up, I saw the colonel's eyes wide open, staring at me. He was dead, but I dropped that foot quickly. It was my first and only attempt to rob a dead Yankee." Perhaps Watkins would have tried harder if the man had been a general. In a torrential downpour at the Battle of Chantilly, Ox Hill, on the afternoon of September 1, 1862, Union Major General Philip Kearny, who lost his left arm in the Mexican War, scouted the terrain ahead of his division. The general rode up to an entire enemy company, ignored their demand to surrender, turned his horse, and headed back, an aide recounted. A Confederate company fired a volley, and a bullet struck the 47-year-old general's back near the spine, killing him instantly. Confederates took Kearny's body to a field hospital. The next day, his remains were returned to the Union Army, minus his sword, pistol, watch, diamond brooch, finger rings, and wallet, which always held a large sum of money, as the wealthy general was known to carry. Confederates also took keepsakes from the man they called the One-Armed Devil. They kept Bayard, Kearny's prized horse, as well. Meanwhile, Army of Northern Virginia Commander Robert E. Lee burned the papers found with the general, presuming they were personal. 4 days after his death, Agnes Kearny wrote to Lee, requesting the return of her husband's horse and sword. Lee, who respected Kearny and felt deep sympathy for the widow, responded on September 28, 1862, "I inquired specifically if his person had been disturbed and was told his uniform appeared untouched. He was lying under guard as he was brought from the field, without his sidearms and hat. After consulting his government, Lee ensured the Confederates returned Kearny's sword, a light one with a leather scabbard suited for a disabled person. It was the private property of a former colleague, Lee decided. The rebels also sent Bayard and Kearny's saddle through the lines for Army of the Potomac commander George B. McClellan to deliver to Agnes. "I thank you for your kind and humane attention to the widow's request," McClellan wrote to Lee. But the rest of the items taken from Kearny remained with the Army of Northern Virginia. On July 3, 1863, Confederate Brig General Richard B. Garnett fell during Pickett's charge. Despite wearing a nearly new uniform coat with a general's star and wreath on the collar, high-top boots, and spurs, his remains were never publicly identified, and his final resting place is unknown. "Inexplicable," said Confederate veteran James Clay, Garnett's orderly, years later. "General Garnett was bravely waving his hat, urging the men forward against the enemy," Clay recalled. He wore a black felt hat with a silver cord. His sword hung at his side. After Clay fell among rocks, he lost sight of the 45-year-old commander during the life-and-death struggle with Union soldiers. Then Garnett's wounded black charger, its right shoulder seemingly blasted off by Union artillery, galloped out of the battle smoke. "At that moment, several Federals dropped their weapons and ran toward our rear," Clay recalled. Two of these deserters reached the rocks where a Confederate captain and I were and offered to help us to safety, clearly for their own protection, and we accepted. They told us our brigade general had been killed, shot through the waist by a grape shot. Rather than recover Garnett's body and belongings amid the chaos, Clay sought treatment at a field hospital for his shot-off right index finger and head wound. "The place was like a slaughterhouse. Legs, arms, hands, all piled up," he recalled. A Confederate staff officer reportedly retrieved Garnett's watch, but the ornately inscribed saber stayed with the general's body. Years later, George H. Stewart, a Confederate brigade commander at Gettysburg, bought the then rusty relic in a Baltimore junk shop. After Stewart's death, his nephew acquired the saber and later gave the cherished heirloom to Garnett's niece. Whether a Confederate or Union soldier took Garnett's saber is unknown. How it ended up in a Maryland junk shop is an even greater mystery. What is certain is its current location, the American Civil War Museum in Richmond, Virginia. At the Wilderness on May 6, 1864, Union Brig General James Wadsworth met a fate similar to Kearny's. As Confederates advanced near the Plank Road, a bullet struck the back of the silver-haired millionaire's head, splattering brains onto an aide's coat. The aide desperately tried to retrieve a gold watch from the 56-year-old officer's coat pocket, but, with Confederates closing in, had no time. He leapt onto the general's horse and rode back to Union lines. Like ravenous locusts, Confederates looted Wadsworth's helpless body, who died 2 days later in enemy hands. His sword, boots, coat buttons, gold watch, a Virginia map, silver spurs, a billfold with $90, and intricately engraved field glasses vanished in the chaos. The Confederates left the white cotton stockings, with Wadsworth's initials stitched in red thread, on his feet. Soon after the war, a Confederate veteran returned the watch to the Wadsworth family and was generously rewarded. Other items taken from the general at the Wilderness were later returned by veterans. But the engraved field glasses, perhaps the most coveted of Wadsworth's possessions, remained missing after the war. In 1921, Confederate Veteran magazine published an obituary of William T. Lowry, an 8th South Carolina private, who claimed to have shot Wadsworth. Lowry reportedly once possessed the field glasses, but they were said to have been destroyed in a fire at his home years earlier. In the 1970s, however, the field glasses reappeared when a descendant of a South Carolina soldier showed the relic to a National Park Service historian during a visit to the Fredericksburg, VA, battlefields. He claimed his grandfather had shot Wadsworth but was uninterested in donating the glasses or giving his name. In 1985, James Wadsworth Symington, the general's great-great-grandson and a former Missouri congressman, placed ads in South Carolina newspapers seeking the gloves and field glasses the general carried at the Wilderness. The effort yielded nothing, and the relic's whereabouts remain unknown. After a sharpshooter's bullet struck 6th Corps Commander Major General John Sedgwick in the cheek, killing him instantly, blood gushed like a fountain and soaked the surrounding bushes. News of the 50-year-old general's death spread, like a lightning bolt, through the Union Army. Army of the Potomac Commander Major General George Gordon Meade and other officers mourned the loss of the general soldiers affectionately called Uncle John. Sedgwick's death shook overall Union Commander Ulysses S. Grant as deeply as the news of President Lincoln's assassination the following year. Lieutenant John G. Fisher of the 14th New Jersey preserved a memento of the killing, cutting down a bush stained with Sedgwick's blood, drying it in the sun, slicing off a 5-inch Y-shaped section, and carving the date, May 9th, into it. After the war, he displayed it on his mantle, a reminder of the ruthless manner in which our brave commander was killed. 4 hours after Sedgwick's death, Frederick T. Dent, Grant's brother-in-law and aide, picked a violet from the death site and pressed it in a book. At Meade's headquarters, Sedgwick's remains rested on a bier beneath a canopy of evergreens. Before the body was sent to Washington for embalming, soldiers paid their respects. No reports mention a soldier secretly clipping hairs from Sedgwick's beard. Even then, as now, vulgarity plagued the nation's capital. After embalming at Thomas Holmes' establishment on Pennsylvania Avenue, the general's body drew many visitors, the Washington Evening Star reported. At least one was a relic hunter. Despite a guard of 4 soldiers near the body, a woman showed remarkable persistence in securing a keepsake of the fallen hero by snipping 2 buttons from his coat. Thieves also targeted one of the Confederacy's most revered generals. At dawn on December 1, 1864, the day after the Battle of Franklin, a search party found Major General Patrick Cleburne's body near Fountain Carter's Cotton Gin, the heart of the bloody fight where 5 other Confederate generals fell. The Irish-born Cleburne lay on his back, as if asleep, his kepi partially covering his eyes. The 36-year-old division commander wore a new gray uniform and a white linen shirt stained with blood. He was in his sock feet, his boots stolen, a witness recalled years later. His watch, sword belt, and other valuables were gone, his body robbed during the night. Cleburne had fallen within Confederate lines. Early in the 20th century, the .36 caliber Colt revolver Cleburne carried at Franklin surfaced with a man in Cleburne, Texas. It later disappeared for years. In 1944, 2 boys found it on the banks of the Nolan River in Texas. Today, the weapon is housed in the Leyland Museum in Cleburne. Perhaps no fallen Civil War general suffered as disgraceful a fate as Old Zolly. Days after the Battle of Mill Springs, a newspaper correspondent saw Zollicoffer's body outside a sutler's tent, wrapped in a blanket. His skin was strikingly pale and clear, the reporter noted, and his face bore a calm expression, which even in death was not entirely lost. Zollicoffer had shaved his beard, likely to avoid recognition, the correspondent speculated. But Federals had stripped Old Zolly of his clothing, from the white rubber coat over his uniform to his shirt, undershirt, and socks. An Ohio private cut 3 buttons from his coat. Colonel Speed Fry claimed to have Zollicoffer's spyglass and intricately engraved sword, reportedly bent when the mortally wounded general fell from his horse. The sword was returned to the Zollicoffer family, per an 1893 account in the National Tribune, a veterans newspaper. In 2020, the weapon and the general's sash from the battle sold at auction for $31,980. Another soldier sent a piece of the general's bloody undershirt to a friend in Alexandria, Virginia. Possessing it made me uneasy for a time, abolitionist Julia Wilbur wrote in her diary. It is a strange and fascinating memento of the rebellion. Even Zollicoffer's hair was cut close to the scalp, likely by ghoulish relic hunters. I regret to say that his remains were shamefully mistreated by the thousands of soldiers and civilians who flocked to see them, the correspondent wrote, likely exaggerating the number of scavengers. By Tuesday evening, the body was nearly bare, he added. This kind of relic hunting borders on desecration. Some fiercely denied the mistreatment of Zollicoffer's remains, but the evidence is undeniable. I have a small piece of Zollicoffer's undershirt, a Federal soldier boasted, and a daguerreotype of a secessionist woman, taken with other spoils. An Ohio newspaper reported a Union officer displaying a piece of the general's buckskin shirt. It was very soft and likely quite comfortable when dry. A week after the battle, 31st Ohio Captain John W. Free wrote of the division of Zollicoffer's clothes as trophies, until strict orders were given to stop. But his trousers and fine buckskin shirt are likely scattered across the northern states, the officer noted, as 4 or 5 different states were represented here. Another Ohioan confirmed Free's account. When the soldier saw Zollicoffer's corpse, wrote Private John Boss of the 9th Ohio. They tore his clothing from his body and divided his shirt for souvenirs. A Tennessean wanted his entire scalp but was stopped because a guard was posted. In a letter to a friend, 9th Ohio Quartermaster Sergeant Joseph Grief wrote of Zollicoffer, "Enclosed you will find a lock of his hair and a piece of his trousers." Shortly after the battle, I searched for his corpse and found it lying in the mud. Union Army authorities eventually halted this gruesome practice, cleaned Zollicoffer's mud-covered body, and placed it in a tent under guard. With no suitable clothing to dress him, a witness recalled, he was wrapped in a fine new blanket until proper attire could be obtained, after which he was dressed and cared for respectfully. Officers and men showed particular regard and unusual respect for his body. Chaplain Lemuel F. Drake of the 31st Ohio viewed the general's remains on a board in the tent. "I saw where he was shot and placed my hand on his broad forehead," he wrote. "He was about 6 feet tall, strongly built, with one of the finest heads I ever saw." The Federals, who kept the body until January 31st, treated the general as a strange, and by then odorous, war trophy. At division headquarters in Louisville, Federal soldiers lined up to view the remains of the general and his aide, also killed at Mill Springs. The Union Army embalmed Old Zolly. Then, the bodies of Zollicoffer and his aide were placed in fine, costly burial cases by the generosity of the government he had fought to overthrow, wrote one indignant Federal soldier. Under a flag of truce, the 2 Confederates' remains were sent through the lines. It was courteous, soldierly, and Christian to return these bodies of men prominent in the misguided cause to their friends, the Federal soldier wrote. But neither courtesy, nor military etiquette, nor Christianity required anything more. Back in his native Tennessee, the remains of one of Nashville's prominent citizens were treated with reverence. In early February, Zollicoffer's body arrived in the state capital, where, despite rainy, highly unpleasant weather, thousands passed by the remains at the state capitol. The next day, the procession to Zollicoffer's gravesite at Nashville City Cemetery, just over a mile away, was one of the largest ever witnessed in the city. At last, Old Zolly could rest.